There are some folks that were not able to make it. So again, thank you for being here. Let me make some formal introductions. So first up, Matt Josephs. He's a senior vice president of LISC's policy team, and he's joining us along with Buzz Roberts. Matt Josephs like I said, Matt manages the team responsible for developing and communicating LISC's federal policy agenda. Before joining LISC in 2012, Matt worked for 13 years at the U.S. Treasury Department's Community Development Financial Institution Fund, where he coordinated policy development and implementation. He holds a BA from Emory University and a master's in public policy from the University of California at Berkeley. Thank you, Matt, for joining us. We are excited to have you here. Again, Buzz Roberts, thank you also for being here. Buzz Roberts is the president and CEO of the National Association of Affordable Housing Lenders since 2015. NALA is the National Alliance of leading banks, community development financial institutions, and other capital providers for affordable housing and inclusive neighborhood revitalization. Buzz served on the Biden-Harris Transitions Agency Review Team for the Treasury Department. He was the director of the Office of Small Business, Community Development, and Housing Policy at the Treasury Department from 2011 to 2015. He was previously Senior Vice President for Policy and Program Development at LISC. Buzz has helped to create the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit, the New Markets Tax Credit, the Home Housing Partnerships Program, regulatory changes to the Community Reinvestment Act, and has also helped with the Capital Magnet Fund, including Treasury funding for FHA multifamily risk-sharing loans to finance affordable rental housing and bond guarantees for CDFIs. We are so delighted to have these experts with us today to talk more about the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act. And with that, I am going to go ahead and ask Matt to share your screen, and Elizabeth and I will come off and allow you to present and get started.
Great. Can everyone see the screen?
Yes.
Are we good? All right. Well, thank you all and welcome. We really appreciate this opportunity to talk about the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act. We are part of the Neighborhood Homes Coalition. Of course, now my computer's not advancing. Hold on. There we go. The Neighborhood Homes Coalition, of which NCST is a part of, is about almost 30 now primarily national organizations, advocacy organizations, coalitions, trade associations, ranging from, kind of the more kind of business-oriented groups like the Mortgage Bankers or the American Bankers Association, to the kind of more advocate side of the equation, including groups like LISC and Habitat for Humanity. So we have a real broad coalition of organizations that have been pushing for this legislation for the past few sessions of Congress. So we're going to kind of walk you through what the legislation would do. We talk a little about where it stands now, and then I think we'll have plenty of time for some questions afterwards to really engage, do deeper dives if you like. And I think Raquel and Elizabeth, do we also want them to? They can send these through the chat, I think, as we go, if you like, and then we'll tee some of these up too.
Yes, that's perfect.
Okay. So what are we trying to solve here? Well, you all know that there's, in every state, there are neighborhoods where the homes might be in poor condition, the property values have been declining, and this lack of kind of move-in ready homes makes it hard to attract home buyers to the communities. And so this kind of creates a cycle where the property values continue to decline. And in most of the country, most housing is single family units, 4 or fewer units as opposed to multifamily. And a lot of our housing stock is aging. 40% is over 50 years old. So this is really presenting a problem not only for communities, and by the way, it's not just an urban problem where you might have a lot of concentrated vacant homes. It's also in rural communities where the cost to develop new homes is skyrocketing, and without decent homes, it's hard to attract businesses to those communities. So it's really both an urban and rural issue. And so it's a problem not only for these communities, but also for first-time home buyers who are looking to get a foothold in the market. So what we would create is the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act. So it's been introduced this Congress, as it has the past couple sessions. Senator Cardin from Maryland and Young were the chief sponsors in the Senate. And these were some of the other original co-sponsors on the legislation. And the House bill was introduced a couple months ago with Representatives Kelly and Higgins taking the lead on that. We are trying, especially on the Senate side, I think we have about 10 co-sponsors. Buzz, you can check me on those numbers. It's even Republicans and Democrats, and that's the objective, is to kind of get one each on at a time. So I know we have some other Democrats in the queue, but I think we're looking for, particularly for Republican sponsors on the Senate side. The House side is, I think we're, most recent count, I think we're up to about 31 co-sponsors, again, relatively even. But there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, because last session of Congress, this legislation had 109 co-sponsors, so a significant number of co-sponsors, bipartisan. So we think there's a lot of folks out there that we're going to remind them that the bill was just reintroduced, and hopefully we'll get a big uptick in the next month or so. That's our goal there. And we can reserve some time at the end, too, to talk about legislative strategy if you like. So what would this credit do? So it's a new federal tax credit, and we think it could help to build or rehab 500,000 new homes over the next decade. We know there's been very successful, and what we're trying to do, and we'll get into this, is really attack that problem where the cost of construction or rehabilitation is more than the value of the home. So these are homes that cannot otherwise be financed by traditional lenders without significant grant subsidy. So we want to create kind of a tax credit that would cover that subsidy gap. You know, we've seen tax credits in action. We know it's right now the primary source of developing affordable rental housing is the low-income housing tax credit. You know, we know taxes and mortgage bonds can also support, maybe support homeowners, but not for the development gaps. Opportunity zones, new markets, those are more commercial revitalization tools, and doesn't really directly align well with a home ownership. So that's what we're hoping to create, is a new tax credit really focusing on this home ownership issue. Single-family homes. It'd be allocated kind of in the same style as the low-income housing tax credit through state allocating agencies, HFAs. There would be, like the 9% credit works, there'd be a per capita allocation per state, $7 per capita. Each state, even the smallest population ones, would get at least $9 million. So approximately $2 billion a year would be allocated across the country for this. For those of you familiar with LIHTC, the states would develop similar qualified allocation plans. There are some bare minimum criteria set forth in the neighborhood home statute, and includes the need in the neighborhood for these investments, the impact on stability and revitalization, and critically, the impact on existing residents is a component as well. What's the ability of the project sponsor? What's their track record? What's a chance of producing long-term ownership, and other state criteria that they might put in there. States will also monitor compliance as the developers are getting these projects online and placed in service, and that can be through inspection, putting caps on developer fees, and other things like that. That's left to the states primarily to administer. So the states will have these annual competitions, will make the allocations, the awards to the sponsors, and that could be a developer, it could be investors, it could be lenders in each of these states. The neighborhood home sponsors will then be able to raise equity capital from the investors and start building the home. And they have up to 5 years to deploy the credits to fully utilize them. But the investors can take credits as each home is brought online and occupied by an eligible homeowner. So no credits are available until the home is occupied by an eligible homeowner. So this is not a program for grabbing up rental properties and slapping a coat of paint. No, this is for home ownership properties only. It's also limited to certain eligible census tracts, because we're trying to target neighborhoods with high poverty and low median incomes, and critically where the home values are also below the median home value. So, this isn't for gentrifying communities that are starting to pop. It's really for the communities that need these kind of gap investments. And the states can obviously develop additional criteria, but this is the base level of eligibility, and about 20% of all census tracts in the country are going to qualify for this. So it's kind of a small portion when you compare with like new markets, where about 39% of the census tracts qualify. It's a pretty targeted approach. But interestingly, 25% of non-metro tracts qualify. So again, it's a tool that's going to be really effective, we think, in rural communities. And in addition, speaking of the rural communities, the states also have some flexibility for up to 20% of their allocation in any given year can be used to target additional non-metro census tracts that might not otherwise meet all three of these criteria. So there's even additional rural wildcard flexibility. It can also be used, the flexibility for to protect owner-occupied rehabs in a gentrifying tract, and also for communities affected by natural disasters. So what qualifies? We have a mapping tool at the Neighborhood Homes Coalition website, and we can definitely share that link with you guys during this conversation. Maybe Elizabeth can pop that in the chat. We have a mapping tool, so you can see for yourself. But this is just an example of what you'll see with the tool. We chose Baltimore because Senator Cardin's our chief sponsor. You can see a lot of communities in blue here are going to qualify for the credit in Baltimore. Erie, Pennsylvania, that's where our key House sponsors from, Representative Kelly. You can see where, a lot of the area in Erie. So these are kind of older industrial communities, probably a lot of vacant homes in need of rehabs. Buffalo, Congressman Higgins, similar kind of situation. Indiana, where our chief sponsors from, Senator Young. It's harder to see with these state maps. It's only when you really drill down, but you can see the pockets of Indianapolis and Gary where you just see pretty much the entirety of the city could potentially qualify. But you also see these pockets of rural areas as well that are blue, the rural counties, and most importantly, if you squint really close, you can see a lot of hash marked communities, and that's where we can take advantage of the rural wildcard. If the state of Indiana were to say, "Oh, we want to target some more rural communities," then they could open up some of the allocation for those areas that are hash marked. I forgot we have a separate slide about how to go and look at your own maps and see your communities. We organize it by congressional district, so it also makes the advocacy a little easier too. You can go right to a member's office and pop up a map and see which census tracts qualify. It's a little bit of a finicky tool. Give it a second. At first, sometimes it looks like nothing qualifies. It just takes a little bit to reload. So be patient with it, but it's actually a great tool. And with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Buzz to talk about more of some of the underlying program rules and requirements.
Matt, before you do that, can you hear me? It's Raquel.
I can.
We did have one quick question that came in. I think it's great if we could maybe enter that before we go forward. So that question came in from Bree Jones. Any concern that this movement will lose steam with Senator Ben Cardin's retirement?
No, honestly, we've got a pretty deep bench now of replace. I mean, first off, let's say our goal, Ben Cardin is going to retire at the end of next year, so he'll be around for this year and next year too. And so he's going to continue to be a strong champion. I'm quite confident. His staff and he are very engaged in this. So our first objective is to try to get something done. And again, we talk about strategy toward the end of this year. Congress is really focused right now on the federal budgets and trying to get through this next 2 weeks without a government shutdown. Presumably, they will eventually come to agreement on what they call a continuing resolution that will allow the budget conversations to go on into October, November, maybe even into December. And oftentimes, or it's not unusual that there'll be a tax bill that is attached with like a spending bill. And that's what our hope is. And we know Senator Cardin will be here at least through this winter to really push that. It's a great question, but in the event we don't get it done this session of Congress, we have several other Senate Finance Committee members that have endorsed the legislation. Senator Brown was one of the original co-sponsors. I think that would be happy to take the mantle from Senator Cardin if we can't get it across the finish line.
Great, thank you so much. And my apologies, Buzz.
No.
Great. Well, let's drill down a little bit into the details because much of our audience are practitioners and they want to know how this is really going to work. So first is we tried to build this as simply and flexibly as possible while still having some basic ground rules at the federal level and affording the states the flexibility to add their own wrinkles as makes sense. So in terms of the types of homes, these could be houses with up to 4 units. In the case of a 2 to 4 unit house, 1 unit would be owner occupied and the others rented out. And there is no restriction on those rental units. We didn't think it made sense to try to have federal law governing individual homeowners and how getting them to track who their renters might be. Also good for condos, also good for co-ops. What kinds of development types? Could be new construction for sale, could be substantial rehab for sale, or it could be owner-occupied rehab where the homeowner isn't going to give up ownership of their home, they just need their home substantially rehabilitated. This also works, by the way, for manufactured homes, as long as they are titled as real estate and permanent and affixed to a permanent foundation. Next slide. Oh, great, we're there. How about the homeowners and home prices? This is flexibly targeted in terms of homeowner incomes up to 140% of the area median family income. So there's an exception for owner-occupied rehabs. There, the income limit would be the median family income, 100% of the median family income. And the maximum home price can't exceed 4 times the area median family income. So, for example, if median family income in a metro area or outside of metro areas statewide would be $90,000, then the maximum homeowner income would be $126,000, and the maximum home price could be $360,000. Now that you can still spend more to build or rehab that home than $360,000. It's just that the maximum sale price can't exceed $360,000. Next slide. All right, so how much are you going to get in terms of tax credits for this stuff? For new construction or sub-rehab of homes that are going to be sold, then the tax credit is going to cover the gap between the development cost and the net sales price. But there are some limitations here. One is that the credit amount is capped at 35% of the total development cost, or 80% of the national median sale price for new homes, whichever is lower. So if it costs you $300,000 to acquire a property and build or rehab it, then that cap would, a credit cap would be 35% of that $300,000. Or $105,000. In terms of, and that $300,000 is less than 80% of the national median sale price for new homes, so that particular factor would not be binding. For a rehab of owner-occupied homes, the tax credit amount is 50% of the eligible rehab cost, and it's capped at $50,000. So if you have rehab expenses on owner-occupied rehab up to $100,000, you get 50% of that full amount. If it costs you more to rehab that owner-occupied home, that's okay, but your tax credit will be capped at $50,000. And we also require a minimum level of rehab of $20,000 per home. That's adjusted for inflation. So the idea here is we're looking for substantial rehab, not just a coat of paint and new carpet, because we really want to extend the real life of the home, and we want to make substantial improvements to it. Let's go to the next slide. So, okay, so as Matt said, the states are going to run a competition, and you'll get your award from the state, and you bring your investors in, you build a rehab, and then sell the homes. When that's done, as each home is completed, inspected, and owner occupied, the credits activate on a house-by-house basis. So your investors can get in and get out quickly. This is different from the low-income housing tax credit, where you really have a 15-year recapture period, and so long compliance extending at least 30 years, including that first 15 years. We don't have those complications here because this is owner-occupied housing. And once the homes are completed and owner-occupied, the investors and developers are done with their work. They are out of the picture. And so there's really no extended compliance for them, and there's no recapture. That's a great simplifier compared with the low-income housing credit. And it's part of our general theme of trying to keep this as simple as possible. But also add that when you're developing a rental property, an apartment building with a low-income housing tax credit, those tend to be properties of some scale. When you're talking about owner-occupied homes, particularly in distressed neighborhoods where there may not be anything comparable to what you're developing, you may want to start at a small scale. And that means that the tax credit has to work at a small scale. And so we've tried to keep this as simple as possible, minimizing lawyers and accountants' costs, minimizing anything like extended compliance, so that you can use the money to get the work done, and you don't need to have a big scale project to make it work and to begin to reestablish a functioning market in your neighborhoods. We do say, however, that if the home is resold within 5 years of its purchase, then the homeowner has to pay a declining share of its profit and back to the state. And the state will then reuse that money for other neighborhood homes eligible projects. So the share of that profit that would be repayable would be 50% within the first year, declining to 10% in the fifth year. Again, states could establish longer or larger repayment obligations. This is simply the federal standard. The idea here is it's an anti-flipping mechanism. And we've built it so that no matter what, the homeowner always has positive equity in their home. So this is a share of their profit that they would pay back to the state, and that implies that they're going to have profit. That's a little different from some other repayment mechanisms, but we felt that it was important for homeowners always to have positive equity in their homes. Next slide. We also wanted to protect against gentrification. This is not a pro-gentrification tool. So how do we do that? We do that through several mechanisms. First is that a qualification for the neighborhood is that the neighborhoods have to have a median home value below the area median home value. In most gentrifying neighborhoods, home values are high, and so they would not be eligible. In addition, the eligible homeowner income, as we mentioned, is limited to 140% of the median family income for that area. Again, gentrification projects often target high-end home buyers, not a good fit for neighborhood homes. The home sale prices under neighborhood homes are limited to 4 times the median family income. Oftentimes, gentrification developments are going to come in at a higher price point than that. The eligible basis for the tax credits is limited to 80% of the national median new home price. So again, that's a way of, we're not looking at $1 million homes here with the credits going all the way up to 35% of that. And so, again, limiting the tax credits here is designed to right-size this for the homes. And the states have to consider the impact on existing neighborhood residents as part of the selection criteria in choosing the winning competing projects. So if you're in a situation where a prospective project could maybe trigger or accelerate a gentrification process that could have could result in significant displacement of existing neighborhood residents, then that would be a red flag for the states. Next slide. So here are some examples. Here's a new construction example where it costs $50,000 to acquire the land. You have construction costs of $250,000, total development costs of $300,000, and you're going to be able to sell it for $240,000. That's fine, but you've got a $60,000 gap, and that's what the credit would cover. And here's just a little check to see, oh yes, the maximum credit available based on that, it should say 35% of $300,000 total development cost would be higher than that $60,000. And so this is going to work out just fine, that's $60,000. So one of the things to note here is you may go into this thinking, oh, we think we can sell this for $240. But if it turns out that we can't, we can only sell it for $230 or $220, you still have enough tax credit available to fill that gap. We caution, don't get too aggressive with this, but we understand also that these are markets, again, where there's not a well-established market. Part of the idea here is to help neighborhoods have sustainable prices in their neighborhood. Let's move on. Here's a rehab example. Could you just go back one slide? Note that land acquisition here is included in basis. This is different from the low-income housing tax credit. You don't have to get an appraisal to say, oh, when we acquired a building, switching back to the next slide, going back and we acquired the building and its underlying land in this rehab example for $75,000, we don't need to get an appraiser to tell us what share of that $75,000 is attributable to land and how much to the existing building on that land. The tax credit is indifferent to that. This is again different from the way the low-income housing tax credit works, but it's another simplifying factor. So in this case of rehab, $75,000 to acquire the property, $125,000 to rehab it, total development cost of $200,000. Here we have a sale price of $160,000. We've got a gap of $40,000. The maximum credit would be eligible for this property would be $70,500. That's 35% of our $200,000 development cost. But we don't need that much. We just need that $40,000 to fill the gap. So that's the credit that would be available. Next slide. Here's a homeowner rehab example. This is much simpler because there's no acquisition involved. The homeowner already is a homeowner. That's what makes this an owner-occupied rehab. They're going to need $60,000 of rehab. The tax credit would be $30,000. And then $30,000 would not be covered by the tax credit. That can come from other sources. It could come from loan proceeds. Perhaps the homeowner is going to refinance their property. It could come from homeowner equity. It could come from city or state grants. It could come from a variety of sources. Next slide. So what do we expect to produce for all this? Well, over 10 years, we think about 500,000 homes. We think about $125 billion of total development activity. We think nearly 900,000 jobs in the construction and related industries, and about $56 billion in wages and salaries for workers there. About $26 billion in federal tax revenues and fees. By the way, that's more than we think this is going to cost Congress from a budget perspective. So we think net, this is actually a moneymaker for the government, but the government's budget rules really don't allow us to take in the secondary revenue generation of tax policies. So it will cost the government something, at least nominally, under budget scoring. We expect that will come in, by the way, at about $20 billion over a 10-year period. So it's going to cost Congress about $2 billion a year in what they might call tax expenditures, right, in the tax credits. So those are some of the biggest numbers, but also, and more broadly, it's going to improve neighborhoods. It's going to reduce blight and vacant properties. It's going to revitalize the neighborhoods. We think you'll have more of an income mix in some of these poor neighborhoods. There'll be more disposable income for neighborhood residents to spend on local shopping. And we also obviously are interested in creating home ownership and wealth building opportunities for families in these neighborhoods. So those are the main outcomes. Next, please. So again, we've got this spiffy website, neighborhoodhomesinvestmentact.org. It may not be pithy, but it's easy to remember. And we already have, as you know, bipartisan bills in both House and Senate. We are building co-sponsorship. We're currently at 32 in the House, including our lead sponsor, and 11 in the Senate, including our lead sponsor there. And we're hoping to increase these in anticipation that we have a fighting chance for an end-of-year tax package that could include this. There's been some encouraging mood music in that regard. Matt mentioned that Senator Wyden is one of the original co-sponsors. Senator Wyden chairs the Senate Finance Committee. It's very unusual to have the chair of the Finance Committee actually be a sponsor of bills that are going to come before the chair's committee. But in this case, Senator Wyden is very supportive of affordable housing, including the low-income housing tax credit and neighborhood homes. And so that's a really great sign. And in the House, we also have bipartisan support led by Congressman Mike Kelly from Erie, Pennsylvania. So we are hopeful that we'll have an opportunity to get this done this year. To put us in the best position for that, we need to have more co-sponsors, both House and Senate, both Republican and Democrat. And we want your help in trying to build that co-sponsorship. If you want to know what is my House member already a co-sponsor, you can go to congress.gov and just type in HR 3940 or S657, and it will show you who all the co-sponsors currently are of those bills. If you forget those bills, you can go back to the Neighborhood Homes website and remind yourself what those bill numbers are. And I see Elizabeth is putting a link to the House co-sponsors and I assume momentarily the Senate co-sponsors. So you can just pick from those links and go directly there too. So we'll stop here and turn it back to Raquel and Elizabeth and see if there are questions that Matt and I can address.
Yes, and thank you so much, both of you. We do have a couple questions in the Q&A. I think some of those actually were answered during your presentation, but let's just take a quick look here. Okay, so there was a question about gentrification. I think Erica Sims had asked about that. I do think you went through that in one of the slides, Buzz. So we'll keep moving.
The only thing I would add to that is each state is going to put together its own qualified allocation plan.
Mm-hmm.
This is the plan they use to run a competition and make funding decisions, make award decisions. That's a public process. If you're worried about gentrification in your community, you should be part of that process so the state is attentive and has the guardrails that would be necessary to address the concern.
Right, right. Another question here is just a distinction in the median family income. Is it based on a family of 4? James Paley had asked that question.
Yes, so the quick answer to that is yes, for purposes of establishing the maximum home price. For purpose of establishing the maximum income of homeowners, that's all. There's a family size adjustment that HUD will apply to that. So a family of 4 could have a higher maximum income than a family of 2.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Next up is a question. Okay, I think you answered this too, but let me go ahead and ask. Bree Jones is asking, how is home value determined? By assessment or by recent comps, sorry.
So what we're looking at is what does it cost you to build and what's your sale price? That's what sets the maximum tax credit amount. However, we know that home buyers are going to need a first mortgage. That first mortgage is going to be based on the appraised value of the home. And so appraisals will come into the picture that way, but you won't find the word appraisal in the bill itself.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I'm gonna put you on the spot, Buzz, because I don't know the answer to this question. What about an owner-occupied rehab that doesn't have a sale price at the end? Would that rely on some kind of appraisal, I guess? I mean, it's unlikely they're going to be exceeding the maximum home values, but.
So it's a much simpler calculation there. It's simply we take the cost of the rehab up to $1,000 and the tax credit is 50% of that amount. The balance has to come from someplace. If the homeowner plans to get that money by refinancing their home, then they're going to have to get an appraisal to satisfy the lender for the purpose of that refinancing.
But for the purpose of the home value too, there are caps on what the value of the home can be, just as there are for new developments, correct?
No, on that, it's simply, it's super simple. It's what's the rehab cost, and the tax credit's going to put
50%.
Put that at 50% up to that $50,000.
I'll remind folks though too that for owner-occupied rehabs, the eligible income limit of the homeowner is 100% of area median. So it really is targeted toward lower income home buyers anyhow. So I don't think there's an opportunity to really try to game this with a higher value home anyhow. So, okay, just testing you, Buzz.
Thank you for that, Matt. Next question is, this is for Buzz. How is that maximum home price calculated? Do the states set that formula for deriving the maximum home price? Interest rate, DTI, etc., are all factors.
Yeah, so maximum home price is a simple formula based on 4 times the median family income. So if median family income is $100,000, maximum home sale price is $400,000. The state doesn't have to come up with that on its own. That's just a simple formula.
Okay, thank you. All right. We just talked about the median family income versus the area median income and the differences there.
Yeah, it's a distinction without a real difference. If you look at this low-income housing tax credit statute, it refers to area median income. HUD has taken that and translated that to a median family income. And so when we were drafting neighborhood homes, we wanted to simplify it and go with the definition that HUD is already using.
Thank you. Next question is, how much are you all advocating to be allocated to this tax credit annually? I think you mentioned that earlier.
Well, it's a good question. It's based on the population of the state. It's in most states, it's $7 per capita. So you just take the population of your state, multiply it by 7. But in small states, we have a small state minimum of $9 million per year. So that's if you're in a state where the population is so small that you'd rather have the $9 million than the per capita formula, that's what you get. We wanted to make sure that every state had at least enough to a critical mass to work with.
Good. And I think you mentioned just at the national level, it's about $2 billion a year for 10 years.
Yeah, that's the cost. The way we've got this, and it's a little bit complicated because in the 10th year in which the credit authority is available, none of that's going to get claimed within that year. The state's got to allocate the credits. The sponsors have to get the homes rehabbed and built and owner occupied before the credits flow. So no credits are going to flow within the Congress's 10-year budget window for tax provisions. It's actually close to $2.5 billion in the first year of credits, and that adjusts with inflation every year and population of the state. So it's going to grow to a little bit more than $2.5 billion over the course of that 10-year period. We wanted to bake inflation and population adjustments in from the beginning, so we don't have to keep going back to Congress and getting those adjustments, while meanwhile losing out to inflation and its eroding effect on the resource. We want to be able to produce about 50,000 homes a year on a steady state basis.
Thank you. Next question, Terry Cholakowski. Hi, Terry. Can you use HUD 203K with the rehab option?
Yes.
I'm not answering them written, but I'm going through them. Next one is Linda Charles. Hi, Linda. So this is from a nonprofit developer perspective. Will nonprofit developers be able to add a developer fee in the construction cost? Is there a maximum? Also, will we get this presentation? Yes, everyone will get a copy of the presentation. It actually will be on our ncst.org website. So we'll have it loaded probably by next week for everyone. So I'll let you answer the other part of that.
Yes, so developer fees are includable. They're includable in the basis for calculating the tax credit. They will be regulated by the states. In fact, there's explicit direction to Congress, to the states in the legislation that the states should be regulating developer fees. States also have to do certain other things like establish quality standards for the housing and cost reasonableness for the construction or rehab work, and presumably a sponsor is going to have to go back and report to the state when a home is done and say, here are our costs and here's the sale price, and have the state review that and say, yeah, that's consistent with what you told us. One other point while I'm thinking about it, it's a nuance that may not be obvious. In the case of a low-income housing tax credit, you know what property it is that you're going to build a rehab for the low-income housing tax credit. And so you're going to go into the state and say, this is the property. This is the building we're going to build. And we know all about the costs. We have a pretty good fix on what the rents are going to be. And off we go. And the state can review it and make its decisions based on that. In the case of home ownership development, however, chances are a sponsor's not going to know precisely what properties it's going to acquire or rehab or build at the time they're making their application to the state. Instead, we expect a process that we see with new markets tax credits, where a sponsor will go to the state and say, hi, here's who we are, here's our capacity. Here is what we plan to do with our neighborhood homes tax credits. We expect to work in these neighborhoods or these kinds of neighborhoods. We expect to focus on some rehab or new construction or owner occupied or some kind of combination of those things. We think the sale prices are likely to be in this range. We think that our development costs are likely to be in that range. We think on average, we're going to need, say, $40,000 or $50,000 per home in tax credits. And so what we want to propose is an award of $2 million of tax credits, and we promise to deliver 40 homes at an average of $50,000 per home in tax credits. And that'll be the basis for the application and the competition. Then congratulations, you win. You've got your $2 million to work with. Off you go. You've projected that $50,000 per home, allowing yourself a little cushion because you sure don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. But what if it turns out that it's only costing you $40,000 of tax credits per home as you start moving down this process? You could deliver more than 40 homes. You could maybe deliver 50 homes for that same $2 million. So you're motivated to do that because chances are your developer fee is based on your total development cost. And if you could do more homes and do a greater development cost with the same amount of credits, you're going to make more money. And so we think developers are motivated to balance out the desire to conserve the subsidy to generate more product and more developer fees on one hand, with the desire to get these homes sold and quickly, which might push you to a lower sale price, consuming more tax credits. So that balancing act is something that the sponsors will have to manage, but we think they're the best position to manage that, and they've got the incentive for conservation of the credit that they can also balance against the other needs.
Yes, thank you. We'll get a few more questions and we'll wrap it up here. Carol Gilbert, hi Carol. Is the tax credit program compatible with land trust and shared equity initiatives that aim for long-term affordability? Great question.
Yes, as long as the homes themselves are either cooperatively owned or they're owned by the homeowner. Yes, for sure.
Thank you. Another question here. The market I'm working in isn't able to support sales prices such as what was in your example. Will we be able to partner other grants and funding available to fill in these larger gaps?
Yes, there's no restriction on that.
All right.
And by the way, your pitch to the state or locality that manages those resources is, if we have this tax credit, then we need less of your grant or interest-free loan money to get this work done. It's a real force multiplier.
Thanks, Buzz. We've got another question here from Saram. Is there any way tax exempt entities such as nonprofits or land banks can apply for these credits for development or acquisition. It's going to depend on the.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the investor has to have the taxable liabilities, but they can certainly be an applicant.
Absolutely. So we see this in low-income housing tax credits all the time. We have a nonprofit sponsor. They apply for and win the award of tax credits from the state. And then they create a limited partnership structure in which they are the general partner controlling the day-to-day operations and bring investors in as limited partners with no day-to-day control. We see that all the time, and the tax credits just pass right through the partnership structure up to the investors.
Right. I think you answered this just a few minutes ago, but can this be combined with other federal dollars, i.e. home? And yes, we said.
Yes, absolutely. Just a caveat there.
Uh-huh.
You got to look at what the income limitations and other limitations of those other programs are. So home generally is limited to incomes up to 80% of the area median. So think carefully. Is there enough of a market under 80% of AMI? And we make the numbers work on that basis. But subject to those kinds of considerations, sure, go for it.
Right. Next question, really quick. We will be selling the tax credits to investors like the LIHTC program. What do you estimate the pricing for the credits will be like? Will there be other costs, including attorney and accounting, that we will have to add to our budget to use these funds? And who do you think will be the typical purchaser?
Yeah, so we think this is going to work pretty similarly to the low-income housing tax credit in all these regards. In terms of investors, we expect that banks and other kinds of corporate or is it possibly high-end individuals would be the investors in this. In terms of pricing the credits, we have an interesting little wrinkle to add to the way we think about this. So yes, we've got these tax credits and investors are going to make a positive rate of return. So you might think, well, they're not going to invest. Whatever they invest will be smaller than the tax credit amount. But here's the wrinkle. The wrinkle is if it costs me $250,000 to build a home and I sell it for $200,000, I have a capital loss of $50,000. If I'm a corporate taxpayer investor in a 21% tax bracket, then that $50,000 of capital loss is worth 21% of that amount to me as cash, about $11,000. So in addition to the $50,000 of credits, I'm going to get $10,500 of tax savings from that capital loss. And that little extra cushion should give me money to pay for attorneys and accountants and maybe a syndication fee if a syndicator is involved. Those kinds of things that might not be covered, might not be part of eligible basis. We've talked to a major accounting firm and they estimate these could sell for $1 or more than $1 per dollar of credit. We'll have to see, though. The market will determine that.
Yeah.
And the other attractive thing, you have a lot of primarily banks are already big housing credit investors, so that would seem like a natural market. They know credits, and I think that will be. But there's also, I think, an opportunity for folks that aren't necessarily CRA motivated, but for economic returns, because the holding period is much shorter. It's less than 5 years, so a lot of companies that have treasury departments will be happier with that rather than having like a LIHTC thing sitting on your books for the next 10 to 15 years. So I think that'll be attractive to some new economic investors as well. And again, because the compliance costs should be much less, there just isn't a lot of, so there will be some attorneys and accountant fees, but it's going to be a lot cleaner than New Markets or LIHTC, I would think.
It's our expectation that there's going to be a lot less judgment that we're going to require attorneys and accountants to make on this stuff, because you don't have to worry about recapture exposure. You don't have to worry about appraisals allocating between land and building costs. There are just a lot of things that are simpler here. And Matt's point really deserves some underlining. This is a short investment.
Yeah.
This is not a 15 to 18-year investment like LIHTC. You know, this could be a 1-year investment or shorter, right? You could say, all right, we're ready to rehab this home. We're going to pull down the investment capital we need for that home. We're going to complete and sell that home within a year. And then the credits flow and the investors get their money back and go away. And that means that on a dollar amount basis, you have to pay investors a lot fewer dollars as their return because you have their money for a much shorter period of time.
Thank you. We've got a few more. We've got maybe 2 more questions. I know, Elizabeth, we are a little bit past the time that we would have provided you for an update. Let me know. I know you can't talk that fast, but there are 2 more questions that I want to get in really quickly. I've talked about this with, the nonprofit developer community in Florida, especially. But one question is here, it sounds like this program would be best targeted toward larger scale developers and not single rehab one-offs. Am I correct in that assumption?
Yeah. I would say I think you skipped ahead a couple questions, but I see the question you're looking at. Yeah, there's got to be some scale to this. I think you can't come in and say, I want to do 1 home and get a credit, because you're applying through a state allocation process. So you're going to come in with a plan. You're going to do 20, 30, 50 homes to make it scale out. Some individual like person that owns 2 or 3 properties would probably not be. It's just the juice isn't worth the squeeze.
Oh, I like that, Matt. So
Scale is relative. So in the LIHTC context, you might say we need a 40 or 50 unit property. You don't need that here.
Right. I know we've talked a lot about the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act today. It is a home ownership based program, tax credit program. So it's not for rentals. That was a question that came in. Linda Charles says, hi, Matt, remembers you from her days at LISC.
To Buzz, I think, yeah.
And to Buzz. And let's see.
Buzz used to be at LISC, yeah.
And Buzz, yeah. One last thing here I think we can kind of squeeze in. Can you clarify, did you say that you must have a tax liability to take advantage of the credit? We said no.
Buzz, the investor would. Right? The developer doesn't have to.
But the sponsor or developer doesn't.
Correct.
Yeah. Right. So I think we got to all of the questions. And Elizabeth, my sincere apologies if we have folks that want to stay on to hear a little bit more of Elizabeth's quick updates on our policy work and what's happening with the Homeownership Alliance. Hang tight, just a few more minutes, but this has been incredible. So thank you so much to Matt Josephs and Buzz Roberts for participating today. We will have this recorded and saved on our website. So with that, let me just see if Elizabeth wants to add anything here.
Yeah, sure. I'll just take a few minutes for anyone that has the ability to stay behind. So if looking in the chat, I'll provide different updates on a few different items, and you can take a look at those links. So the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act website is up there that we have learned a lot about. If anybody that remains on the call is serving communities in Missouri, I've just put a link in the chat to a letter that the Neighborhood Homes Coalition has drafted on behalf of members or organizations that are serving areas in Missouri, not just in your kind of blue dots or in your St. Louis and Kansas City areas, but there's also a significant interest, particularly for the Republican chairman on Ways and Means, to be able to serve rural areas. So you can see in the text that is provided embedded in that link that is where our focus area resides. So if you are a Missouri organization, we please encourage you to sign on. We have been very busy over the summer with the work of the Homeownership Alliance and NCST. I'll just post 2 updates of some accomplishments that we've done over the summer. The first is NCST and the Homeownership Alliance. We participated in the FHFA's single family pricing RFI process. So you can see in that link there that is a joint response that we have, really understanding how it is that all of these, the tizzy of LLPAs has kind of ruffled up items within the community, and really ensuring that any future changes can really be anchored in clarity and transparency to the nonprofits that really are going to be doling out this work and really seeing the impact of these single family pricing changes within the community. And we have used our Homeownership Alliance members as really the really bolstering those perspectives. Similarly, the Homeownership Alliance also provided a response to the Department of Treasury's CDFI fund in their request for information regarding capital magnet funds on better streamlining those programs to align with other affordable housing resources provided at the federal level. Again, the way that we conduct our responses to federal agencies within the Homeownership Alliance is really anchoring all of our comments in the perspectives of practitioners. So if this seems like something of interest to you and you are a nonprofit organization conducting homeownership activities, please reach out to me. We are actively recruiting additional members of the Homeownership Alliance. You can see in that website there a little bit more information. There will be a form where you could fill out if you're interested, as well as emailing me at ecoats@ncst.org. Thanks so much for joining, everyone. Raquel, I don't know if you want to send us off, but those are my policy updates.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Hopefully you all can hear me. Just closing out for our fantastic briefing today. There's so much good information, and I was just happy to be a part of sharing that with you here from NCST's perspective. Please reach out to any of us if you have any additional questions, but if not, you can always find the recording and presentation at www.ncst.org. And we will look forward to seeing you next month, third Wednesday, 12:30 to 1:30. Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon.